Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always driven by the context. I'm your host, John Strazicich. Basically, you could just refer to me as Trucker John. All these videos that you have seen on this site are taken right out of my truck as I've been driving around the country. Okay, now this particular session here is coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, and but anyhow, coming to our text, the Song of Moses, the Ha'azinu, as it is known from the Hebraic community, is broken down into basically two very large, blocks. And the first one goes from Deuteronomy 32, 1 to 18. And we have covered that. We began the second part here in verses 19 to 43. And if you could look up here, this is just a macro section here of 19 to 43. And you can see here that under point A, we have the narratological introduction and Yahweh speech report formula, which is found in verse 20, A alpha. And that would just be the words Vayomer, and he said. And then what happens here, beginning in verse 20 all the way down to 42, is Moses's quotation of a Yahweh speech. So the second half of the Song of Moses is really Yahweh speaking. And he formally introduces Yahweh in verses 19 to 20a alpha. And then Moses then steps back in again here and at verse 43 to bring about the narratological conclusion. And it's a call for an invocation of the heavens, earth, and nations to rejoice with Israel. And verse 43, my title for that is definitely going to be expansive upon the MT, the Masoretic text, to include both the Septuagint and a manuscript found at Qumran. But Moses does also, he inserts himself basically in some explanatory situations here within the Yahweh speech. And we'll see that as we go along. But for today's lesson here in verses 19 to 25, we'll see that Moses doesn't really interrupt Yahweh's speech at all. And so this is very important to understand that, when we're looking at this text, that it's really divided into two parts. It's basically the Song of Moses, in verses 1 to 18, and then it's the Song of Yehovah or Yahweh in verses 19 to 43, how it ends there. So I just, that's important for our macro structure to understand the makeup of this of the Song of Moses. So it's really the Song of Moses and of Yehovah. Okay, moving right along here. We come here to the Aleppo Codex once again, and our text today begins here in verse 18 here. And you probably are wondering why it's in the second verset slot, and that was because, remember, our scribe here, when he was copying whatever type of text he had before him, or if he was the first to try to put this in poetic utterances and versets, well, he was unaware of a tristic. So this particular line here, Vidam Enav Tishte Chamer, this is, and with the blood of grapes you drank wine. Well, that would have been the second verset. The first one would have been, and with the, you ate with the finest of wheat. And so this actually ends verse 14. Then this here begins verse 15, and it all stems from the fact that our copyist here, Ben Buyah, was not aware of a tristic, and it continues. Everything is off by a verset all the way to the end, and we've mentioned that last time. But it's just good to note that thank God for the bishop. That is Robert Loth, who came along and began to right the ship. Okay, then we pick up here in the Aleppo Codex in verse 18. And remember, this here is the Moses' narratological introduction of Yahweh's observation and speech reporting formula here in 20A Alpha. And then with Astira begins the actual speech in the first person of Yahweh. So we begin here. Vayar Adonai vayinatz mika'as banav uvenotav vayomer Astira fanai mehem ma acharitam ki dor ta puchot hema banim lo emun bam haim kin uni below el ki asuni behavlehem va'ani ak nis aim below am begoy navel or naval ak isem ki esh kadecha ve'api vatikad ad sheol taktit vatochal eretz vivula vatilahet mosedei harim. And we'll stop there because this is really going to start the second strophe over here with aspe. Okay, then we begin here with our translation here, beginning in verse 19. And Yahweh saw, and he was spurned from the vexation of his sons and daughters. And he said, I shall cause my face to be hidden from them. I shall see what their latter end shall be, for they are a perverse generation, sons in whom there is no faithfulness. They caused me to be jealous with a no God. They vexed me with their vanities, and I shall cause them to be jealous with a no people. With a foolish nation I shall vex them. For a fire burns in my anger, and it burns unto the lowest Sheol. And it will devour the earth and its, we'll just say its produce, and it will burn down to the foundations of the mountains. And we'll stop there. Okay, this particular text, this here comes from Deuteronomy chapter 31, and it picks up here in verse 14. And I'll just translate, Vayomer Adonai. And Yahweh said to Moses, Behold, your days are near to die. Call for Joshua and take your stand in the tent of meeting, and I will command him. And Moses and Joshua went, and they took their stand in the tent of meeting. And Yahweh appeared in the tent in a pillar of cloud, and the pillars of cloud stood at the entrance of the tent. And Yahweh said to Moses, behold, you are laying down with your fathers, and this people will arise and go a-whoring after the foreign gods of the land, that he is going there in its midst. And he shall forsake me and break my covenant that I cut with him. And my anger will burn against him in that day, and I shall forsake him, and I will cause my face to be hidden from them. So we can see here that this is the first mention of Yahweh causing his face to be hidden from them. And he will be devoured, and many evils and distresses shall find him. And he will say in that day, is it not because my God is not in my midst, these evils have found me? And I shall certainly cause my face to be hidden in that day concerning all of the evil which he did, for he turned to other gods. Now write for you this song and teach it to them, that is the sons of the sons of Israel, and place it in their mouth, so that this song will be for me a witness against the sons of Israel. So this is very, very, very important. So it was very important here for Joshua to be included in this, and because when we come down here to verse 44, and this is just this is chapter 32, and it says, and Moses went and spoke all these words of this song in the ears of the people, he and Joshua the son of Nun. So this is very important that here, even in verse 44, then Joshua is included in this song of Moses, and that for Joshua to be installed, it was very, very important for him to hear and be a part of Yahweh revealing what Moses was to record in this song. And note here that it says that I will certainly cause my face to be hidden from them in that day when all these evils overtake them, and that he was supposed to put this song and teach it to them and put it in their mouth, so the song would be a testimony here against the sons of Israel. Okay, then coming then to the text, as I have put it down here, we have three strophes here that you could possibly make out of verses 19 to 25, and I have I have put them down as 19 and 20 would be our first introductory strophe, kind of a combination of things, but it closes because of the basis clause here, the motive clause. And that's why I have chosen to put 19 and 20 as the first strophe. Then 21 and 22 here, its focus is on retribution theology. That would definitely be separated here from verse 20. And then 23 then would be additional judgments that would be separated from 21 and 22. That we would find here in 23 through 25. So this is the way I have broken up the text according to my reasoning, and we'll explain that as we work through the text. So we'll be first looking here at verse 19, as we know, this is the narratological introduction, and it's very important how he says here that Yahweh saw and he had spurned because of the vexation of his sons and daughters, and he said. So then now we have the first person accounts here of I. So this is Yahweh speaking. I, okay, I. So these are I here. So these are all here. This preformative olive is going to then be the sign of the imperfect verb that is put on the front of the verb to let us know how to understand it and parse it. Okay, so Moses very craftily introduces the Jahwe Rede here, the Yahweh speech. And it continues, like I said, all the way down to the end with a few little places where Moses will then offer an expansive explanation for what Yahweh said. But he formally closes it off in verse 43 with his, in a third person perspective to close out the song. But for now, we'll be looking here then for the next couple weeks here on Yahweh's specific, his accusations and his judgments upon Israel. So remember here, it says that I shall cause my face to be hidden from them. That's line A, and then line B is, and I will see what their latter end shall be. So this is this particular distich, is one of sequence that he, by hiding the face, then he's going to then see what the consequences of that will be. Well, he's going to then see what their latter end, how it will turn out for them, right? When Yahweh says he's going to hide his face from you, that is terrifying, because you no longer have mercy, you no longer have grace. He has left you to your own devices, and you're going to reap whatever you have sown. And remember, this happened because that they had committed apostasy. They went and worshipped other gods. Verses 15 to 18 specifically spelled that out, and in the previous slide we had, remember we looked at chapter 31 and where Yahweh foresaw that they were going to, after Moses' death, that they would certainly go and worship the gods of the lands. And he said that I will certainly cause my face to be hidden from them. This is terrifying, because the opposite of that is, found in the Aaronic blessing of Numbers chapter 6, that, cause your face to shine upon them. That's what, Aaron was, to command the blessing upon Israel, to have Yahweh's face shine upon you. So when Yahweh's face is shining upon you, well, then that's favor and that's grace. But when he hides his face from you here, astira fanai mehem, I shall cause my face to be hidden from him. That's terrifying. Okay, and then he's going to say, then he, he will see from his own vantage point what their latter end's going to be, and you never want to be left up to your own devices. I mean, if you're an idolater, oh my gosh. Hell to pay, and he will get to hell down here, because his anger burns down to the lowest Sheol. And then we have a basis clause here, key, for they are a perverse generation, sons in whom there is no amun, no faithfulness. So this is an accusation. As a basis clause for the reason why Yahweh causes his face to be hidden from them. Okay, then coming then here to our second strophe, verses 21 and 22. Now, this focuses on retribution. This is classic retribution theology, and of course, it's going to be accompanied by a motive clause here, key, in verse 22. We saw this in the previous strophe up here, in the last part of verse 20. And so likewise, he's going to furnish another basis clause for this retribution theology. But let's first look at this at verse 20 itself. This is very, very good Hebrew poetry. They caused me to be jealous by a no God. They caused me to be vexed by their vanities. And I shall cause them to be jealous by a no people. By a foolish nation I shall cause them to be vexed. Okay, so this is tit for tat. Okay, this is eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So this is classic retribution theology, and when Yahweh decides to judge a people, that means that they have come to an end. They have tried Yahweh's patience for a very, very, very long time, and there comes a time when God will judge a person or a community or a nation. This is just the how we should to make an application for this. The principle of this teaches that Yahweh does judge his people, and if don't you dare ever destroy Yahweh's ability to make you reap what you sow, and you don't tell God what he can and cannot do. All right. Just remember Revelation chapter 2 and 3. You want to see what Yahweh does in the New Testament church? Yeah, well, just read those chapters. They're threats, and they're not. They're real threats. Okay, and don't let your theology that God doesn't judge people. Oh, God's only love. Well, you have a half-baked theology. That's all you have. You have a half-baked theology. Prove to me that God doesn't judge. Jesus said, I'll tell you who to be afraid of. Don't be afraid of the guy that can kill you. Be afraid of the guy that can both kill you and throw your butt in hell. That's whom you should fear. Okay, so that is very, very important. And Christ spoke that to his own disciples. So we should take these warning passages, like as in Hebrews, as absolutely they're possible. Okay, you don't just lose your salvation; you throw it away, and then after you throw it away, well, then God judges you. All right, and that's just a plain reading of the passage. I don't twist the Bible. I don't cram my theology on a text. I let the text speak for itself. Okay, and let the text inform your theology instead of cramming your theology down on a text. Okay, so this is the principle of retribution. They made Yahweh jealous by worshiping the gods of the Canaanites, and they vexed him. That they utterly made him go in a rage with their vanities. So then Yahweh said, okay, well, tit for tat. I shall cause them to be jealous by a no people. By a foolish nation, I shall cause them to be enraged, to be vexed. Okay, so that is retribution theology. This is a classic, form here. This quatrain here is a perfect example here, of parallelism within the versette, but also between the versets, and then it's reversed. So this is classic. You got to understand this, and so then Paul picks up on this in Romans 10 and 11. And so this no people that Yahweh is going to cause Israel to be vexed by is the church, and Paul saw that we were going to provoke Israel to jealousy. So that this is all found in Romans 10 and 11. We'll look at those verses, but this is what God was going to do. God has His covenant people, okay. And God was not just going to allow His covenant people to abandon Him and not do something about it. Well, so then God said, okay, well, I'm going to expand on this covenant nation, and it's not going to be exclusively just for Israel. It's going to be opened to the whole world. And that's how we are to understand verse 21. And now, but we need to look at the basis clause. For a fire is kindled in my anger, and it burns to the lowest Sheol, all the way to the bottom of hell. And it will devour the earth and its we'll just say its produce. And it will inflame the foundations of the mountains. So you can see here that all creation is it's gonna burn up the earth ultimately. Okay, I mean this anger in Yahweh is kindled. This fire is so great it burns all the way down to Sheol. So believe me, this is somebody really pissed off. When God says His anger is going to burn down to the lowest Sheol because of the apostasy of His people. Well, this is what's going on in even in the modern day churches. We have lesbo homo hedonica going on. The lesbian homosexual trannies taking over the mainline churches who have completely abandoned God, and they're worshiping Satan. So they have turned around and are committing the same atrocities and rebellion of God's covenant as Israel did. And so the times of the Gentiles are slowly coming here. It's coming to a head here. And when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, then God will come back to reclaim all Israel will be saved. But in the meantime, God is making Israel jealous through the Christian church, through the obvious observation that Israel can see that God, their own God, is now working through the Christian community. Okay, then now approaching our last strophe here in verses 23, 24, and 25. Now this is actually very, very, very devastating. And you want to know how deep Yahweh's anger is going to burn down to the lowest Sheol? Now you're going to find out exactly how all that, what happens, what Yahweh's intending to do to Israel. says, I shall sweep over them evils. I shall spend on them my arrows. Those ruined by famine, those who are consumed by a fiery blaze, and bitter destruction. I shall send against them the teeth of beasts, with the venom of those things which crawl in the dust. And I shall, the sword shall bereave without, and from within terror, both young men and virgin, the suckling child with the man of gray hair. So you gotta look at whom Yahweh is going to then, sweep over these many evils, and who he's going to spend his arrows on. Okay, they're enumerated. Those who are ruined by famine, those who are consumed by a blaze, those and bitter destruction. Excuse me. And then it says, and I will send against them the teeth of beasts, with the venom of those things that crawl in the dust. Okay, so we can see here that, and then the class of people continues. It's the sword will bereave from within, and terror, the sword will bereave without, and terror within. So whether if you're outside fighting, you'll be slain by the sword, and when you're inside recovering and hiding, you're going to be, you're going to be bereaved by terror. And who does this include? Both the young men and the virgins, the sucking child, the nursing child, with the man of gray hair. So this is the whole nation. And I really, I'm just going to say it, okay? God doesn't hold necessarily to the same standards of justice that we do. God does exterminate people. And he will literally wipe off a nation from the earth. Okay? And that is what we would call genocide. And now, this is what Yahweh does. It's not, I'm not saying that you and I are to go out to commit genocide. But Yahweh, when Yahweh wants to commit genocide on, let's say, Amalek, or when God told the Israelites to commit genocide upon the inhabitants of Canaan, well, God determined that they had, that community, or those communities had a span of time in which to live right, to live life rightly, and they failed to do so for centuries, and eventually, the chickens come home to roost, okay, and God determines when a people no longer deserve to live, and this is remember when we had when Lot's wife had passed away, which turned to a pillar of salt, the younger and older daughter, laid with Lot, and what became of that was the people of Moab and the people of Ammon, and God had used both Ammon and Moab to destroy the Anakim and the Zuzims from that dwelt where they did, because God determined that the giants, those are part of the we would say the Nephilim, that Yahweh said to told and commanded Moab and Ammon to go in and exterminate them, and it said that God had them remove those people from the earth. So when you actually read the Old Testament, you're going to see that Yahweh does commit genocide on a people. You'll see here that next week we'll see here when this looks like genocide right here. I mean, this looks like Yahweh is going after total destruction of the nation here. But you'll see that when we come to verse 26, that's why I made it a separate unit for next week. You'll see then the basis that Yahweh is not going to commit genocide on his own people. Okay, and that's why Paul would say that God forbid, God hasn't cast away his own people. But the judgment here on these sinners of Israel is very, very severe. And the worst atrocities that Yahweh here has done to Israel. He has swept over them many evils, and he has consumed them by his arrows, and they have been ruined by famine. They have been devoured by the flame, and by bitter destruction. And he sent against them wild beasts, the fangs of lions. Think of that. I mean, it's fierce to be killed by a lion or a bear. Okay, and then to be bitten by snakes and scorpions. This. I mean, to think that God would use these are parts of his arrows that he would spend on an apostate people. I mean, Yahweh's anger burns to the lowest Sheol, and believe me, it's coming for America. There is so much abomination going on here. This LGBTQ people is just disgusting. And yep, the sword will bereave without and tear from within, and makes no distinction upon the young man and the virgin, the young child with the man of gray hair. And if Yahweh is going to destroy you, I'm sorry, dude, you're done. Okay, in the remaining portion here of this particular unit we're working on, we're going to look at its New Testament Nachleben. That means what was the afterlife of Deuteronomy 32 in the New Testament? How did it live its life out in the New Testament? That's Nachleben means, afterlife. And so we're going to see here then Paul uses these texts that we looked at here today in Yahweh's retribution, where he said, I will make them jealous by a no people, and by a foolish nation I will provoke them. And we'll see how this all plays out within Pauline theology, in Romans 10 and 11. But first of all, the Deuteronomy 32 then is pretty much followed by Paul here, in verse 19, and that's why I put the Septuagint here. They made me jealous by a no God, and they provoked me by their idols. So by their idols, this was behavlehem, by their vanities. Okay, and that's typically most always interpreted by scholars as idols, as the Septuagint rightly had observed. And I shall make them jealous by a no nation, and by a foolish nation I shall provoke them. And so this is the testimony here of the LXX, how, just as it properly interpreted the Hebrew text. And now let's see how Paul then uses it. But I say, has Israel never known? First, Moses says, I shall make you jealous by a no nation, by a foolish nation, I shall provoke you. Okay, so you can see here that you here and them here. These are some differences, but it all makes the same. Paul's just personalizing it here for Israel, and so he's just personalizing it. That's all he's doing. He's accommodating the text to bring it home. And then it says, and Isaiah daringly also says, I was found by those who did not seek me, and I became manifest to those who did not ask for me. But to Israel, he says, all day long I have stretched out my hands to a disobedient and contradicting people, or those who speak against. The old King Jimmy says, gainsaying. A gainsaying people. Classic, way to interpret it, following the King James. But here, what Paul's doing here is that he's applying the no nation and the foolish nation to the Gentiles, and so that this is how God was going to provoke Israel, for them to, awaken out of the hardness that they had placed upon themselves. And I believe that hardness specifically came from Caphias when he said, his blood, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. When he spoke those words to Pontius Pilate, well, that was that brought down this curse upon them, and it's created this hardness, and in part until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. Okay, then what we're going to do here is we are going to then follow Paul's argument here in Romans 11:1, and we'll be seeing how these texts begin to pop up here and have reference back to Israel and the church as we progress through the text. So please bear with me, and we'll be killing two birds with one stone here, because Israel continues to demand a lot of attention today in today's world, and you hear a lot of things being said about Israel and the church, and just remember this: if you're going to derive, your theology, it better be from the text. And what better text to follow than the Apostle Paul, who is the apostle to the Gentiles, but is a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Therefore, I say, God has not cast off his people, has he? Meganoita, may it never be. For I am also an Israelite from the seed of Abraham, the tribe of Benjamin. God has not forsaken his people whom he has foreknown. Or do you not know in Elijah what the scripture says, how he interceded to God against Israel, saying, O Lord, your prophets they've killed, your altars they have thrown down, and I alone am left. They seek my soul. But what does the revelation say to him? I have left to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Therefore, in this manner also in the present time there has come about a remnant according to grace. And if it is by grace, it is no longer of works, since grace is no longer grace. And And if it is of work, and if it is by works, it is no longer grace, since works is no longer works. What then? That which Israel was seeking, this it did not obtain, but the elect obtained it, and the rest were hardened. Just as it is written, God gave to them a spirit of stupor, eyes not to see, ears not to hear, until this day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap, and for a stumbling block and for a recompense to them. Let their eyes be darkened not to see, and their backs always bent over. Therefore, they did not stumble in order that they may fall. May it never be. But by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles in order to provoke them. Okay, that's the key. In order to provoke them. And if they're, I guess their stumbling is the riches of the world, and their loss, the riches of the Gentiles, how much more is their fullness? Okay, and so you can see here that just from this text here, that Paul has a lot to say about Israel. And he has a lot to say about how the church is left here then to provoke the unbelieving Jews to jealousy. Okay, now, God shows Israel, really no favors. I mean, if they forsake Him, He's going to forsake them, but He's always going to reserve to Himself, as He did here. I've left to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed their knee to Baal. And then it says, therefore, in this manner, in the present time, there's come about a remnant according to the election of grace. This is speaking about the Jewish people who believe in the Messiah. Okay, and that they are believing in Christ, and they're not trusting in their works. And so what Israel was striving to obtain through works, they didn't obtain it, but the elect obtained it. That is, the elect Jews who believed in their Messiah to save them. And then it says the rest were hardened. So this is the judgment. We look at Israel today; they're doing a lot of bad things, But here it says, God shows those no favors. But he's never going to completely cast off his people. He's always going to leave a remnant amongst them who are good and believing. And then the church here is here then seen as an element that provokes Israel to jealousy, seeing that that they are obtaining the riches of the world, and salvation has come to the Gentiles through the disobedience of those Israelites, and then it tells you here that eventually how much more their fullness is talking. He's talking here about that if Israel does believe and they what will their fullness be? It's going to be life from the dead. Okay, so we'll continue on here in Paul's argument here in Romans 11, and this is very, very, very important. And this slide is very important for you to understand exactly your place in God's plan of salvation for mankind. For I say to you Gentiles, as much as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. If somehow I may make jealous my countrymen, I think that's the best translation for Tain Sarka, and I shall save certain of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what shall their acceptance be except life from the dead? And if the first fruits is holy, so also the lump. And if the root is holy, so also the branches. And if certain of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive branch, were grafted in amongst them, and you have become a fellow partaker of the root and of the rich fatness of the olive, do not boast against the branches. And if you boast, you do not bear the root, but the root you. Ouch. Just remember who you are, Gentiles. Therefore, you shall say, the branches were broken off that in order that I may be grafted in. Well said. They were broken off by unbelief. You stand by faith. Do not be high-minded, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither shall he spare you. Oops, there went somebody's Calvinism and their OAS, their once saved, always saved garbage. Therefore, behold the kindness and severity of God upon those who fell, severity upon you, kindness. If you abide in kindness, since you will also be cut off. Oh my gosh. And those, if they do not abide in unbelief, they shall be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. And if you by nature were cut off a wild olive branch, and contrary to nature were grafted into the good olive, how much more these by nature shall be grafted into their own olive. So this is, this just lets you know that, as Christianity is not a different religion. It's Jewish. It's a Jewish religion. Okay, and we're grafted into the rich root of the olive tree that Israel stems from. So they are the bearers of of the covenant that God made through Abraham, and through Abraham all the Gentiles of the earth would be blessed. So this is just God's plan of salvation. It's to use Israel, and when Israel is not acting good, they're not believing in their Messiah. Well, they're broken off, and we have spoken well. They were broken off that we might be grafted in. But then God says, fear, if he didn't spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. So don't be high-minded. Don't think that, that you have replaced Israel. The church, replacement theology is a doctrine from hell, and it's foolishness. So, this here, and if they don't abide, if the Israelites, don't continue to abide in unbelief, but they believe, God's able to graft them in again. Well, so much for your, your unconditional election. I mean, my gosh. I love this. I love Romans 11. It trashes so many people's pet theologies and their cows. I just love how Paul slays them all. Okay, so we'll follow Paul to the conclusion of his argument. I do not desire you to be ignorant, brethren, of this mystery, in order that you might not become high-minded, because a hardness from part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles enters in. And in this manner, all Israel shall be saved. So that's why Paul says God has not forsaken his people, and they have not stumbled in order that they might fall. He foresees a period in the future in which all Israel will be saved, but it's when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. Okay, so this ties right back to what Luke said on his Olivet discourse in Luke 21, when it's talking about Jerusalem, it's going to be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And according to Daniel's vision of the image, the head of gold and the arms and chest of silver, and the stomach of bronze, and then the feet and legs of iron, okay, and clay. Well, those are all, Babylonia, okay, is the head of gold, and Rome is the feet of iron and clay, which is still here today. Whatever, the Roman Empire is just, we just happen to be, America is the Roman Empire simply gone west. It's just the aggrandizement of the Roman Empire, and we're nothing but a bunch of, people from Europe. My family comes out of Croatia, out of Yugoslavia. So anyhow, the times of the Gentiles is when Christ returns. He, when the rock, is cut out of the mountains, made without hands, instructs the image. That's when the times of the Gentiles come to an end, and when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. This all refers to the second coming of Christ, and at Christ's second coming is then Israel will look upon him whom they pierced, and they'll realize, who they pierced, and that Christ was their Messiah, and they will all become saved, and they will live into the millennium as mere men. But those Jews who were believers and Christians, we are all going to be resurrected and rule and reign over the kingdom for 1,000 years, the millennium. Okay, and this is what this is referred to. Just as it is written, the deliverer shall come out of Zion. This is, Christ is returning to the Mount of Olives, to Jerusalem. Okay, and then, he will come out of the deliverer will come out of Zion. I mean, some people, what do they think where Christ is going to return to? It's right there in Zechariah 14. So, there's just a lot of foolish people that aren't really well read in the Scripture. What can I tell you? I try to read the Bible as much as I can, and as you can see, I can read Greek as probably almost as fast as you can read in English, but plus do translation. And he shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them whenever I take away their sins. On the one hand, according to the gospel, they are enemies on your account, and on the other hand, according to election, they are beloved of the fathers. For the gifts and calling of God are without regret. For just as you formerly were disobedient to God, but now you were shown mercy by the disobedience of these, in this manner also these were disobedient in your mercy, in order that they might be shown mercy. For God has imprisoned all in disobedience, in order that he may have mercy upon all. And then he goes in, the depths and the riches of knowledge and wisdom of God. So he just goes on from there. But here, this lets us know the big picture of eschatology for Paul, and that all Israel will be saved, and that God hasn't forsaken his people. Of course he hasn't. And we're grafted into them, and we should be happy, but so we skate in on the coattails of Israel. And Christianity is a Jewish religion. If you think Christianity is a different religion than Judaism, you're a kook.